Bioshock. Chapter 1. The plane shuddered, jolting Jack awake as it broke through the dark clouds. He gripped his armrests, knuckles white, blinking in confusion at the other empty seats. Where was everyone? A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the cabin, showing no signs of the other passengers. Just then the aircraft took a sudden nosedive, the Atlantic Ocean surging up to meet it. Jack braced himself as the plane violently struck the water, skidding across the swirling waves before settling into an uneasy float. Stunned, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stood on shaky legs, squinting through the rain-streaked windows. In the distance, a lonely lighthouse rose out of the foggy horizon. Finding no signs of life aboard the sinking plane, Jack pried open an emergency exit. Icy water flooded in as he leapt into the sea, gasping from the freezing temperature. Kicking furiously, he swam for the distant beacon growing ever closer. The imposing lighthouse loomed overhead as Jack heaved himself onto the rocky shore, collapsing in exhaustion. He lay there for a moment, catching his breath before pushing himself to his feet. A flashing bulb indicated a winding staircase leading up the lighthouse interior. Jack climbed the metal steps cautiously, alert for any clue to explain his current predicament. At the top he discovered a small bathtub-like chamber, with a lever labeled press. With no other option, he pulled the lever down and braced himself as the compartment jerked into a descent. The bathysphere passed through a dark ocean trench before emerging into the glow of an underwater city. A sign proclaimed, "Welcome to Rapture." Jack peered out in awe at the crumbling metropolis, Art Deco buildings connected by glass tunnels, fish swimming past neon-lit windows. Rusted submarine docks, flickering advertisement signs, and ominous spotlights hinted this once great utopia was now a mere shadow of its former glory. Where were all its people? Jack wondered. What series of events could have led to this decaying ruin? Chapter 2. The bathysphere docked at an empty station, and Jack cautiously exited the vehicle. He slowly ascended a grand staircase lined with bronze statues, arriving at a sprawling atrium. Shattered glass crunched under his shoes as he walked past a towering banner depicting a man named Andrew Ryan. "Is anybody there?" Jack called out, his voice echoing in the vast, empty space. He passed by a circus of values vending machines stocked with first aid kits, coffee mugs, and cans of food, confirming someone had to still be alive to keep it filled, right? The entire place felt like a lavish ghost town. Venturing further, Jack discovered a towering waterfall pouring down between buildings, windows looking into ruined shops and restaurants, overturned tables hinting at chaos. Across a bridge, he came upon a gathering space dominated by a massive Art Deco sculpture of a man, woman, and child. A plaque read, "No gods or kings, only man." This was the grand philosophy of Andrew Ryan, but where was he now? What happened to the people? Jack felt like he was missing some vital piece explaining it all. A garbled voice suddenly rang out behind him. "Look, Mr. Bubbles, an angel." Spinning around, Jack spotted a small girl in a tattered dress at the far end of the hall. She stared at him with glowing yellow eyes. "I can see light coming from his belly," she said before blinking out of sight behind a pillar. Jack rushed after her, only to find she had disappeared. "Wait, come back," he called, but there was no reply. He was alone again in the vast decay. Chapter 3. Jack descended a curved staircase, following signs pointing toward the medical pavilion. If there were still people alive in this underwater metropolis, surely he'd find help there. The halls grew increasingly dilapidated the deeper he explored, flickering lights revealing blood stains and claw marks on the walls. It was clear some violent struggle had ravaged the city. Rounding a corner, Jack stumbled upon a slumped corpse. Kneeling to examine it, he recoiled in shock as the body let out an inhuman screech and leapt at him, bloody scalpel in hand. Jack grappled with the wildly thrashing man, his mad gaze and deformed face hinting at some awful mutation. With effort, Jack managed to shove the crazed attacker off and sprint away, the maniacal screams echoing behind him. More deformed creatures poured out of side passages as Jack fled through the leaking corridors. He ducked flying bricks and hurled debris while the mob gave chase, their demented shrieks barely sounding human. Skidding around a corner, Jack found himself at a dead end. He spun around, grabbing a rusty pipe off the floor as the pack approached. As the first one lunged, Jack swung with all his might, the pipe cracking against its skull. He barricaded himself in a side office, collapsing a bookshelf to block the door as the frenzied pounding came from outside. Sliding down against the wall, Jack caught his breath in shaken disbelief. What were those things? Almost like feral ghouls, but with traces of humanity buried under madness. Jack realized if he had any hope of escaping this nightmare city, he first had to survive. Chapter 4. Atlas, 2,000 words. "Hello, can anyone hear me?" A voice crackled over a radio on a desk. Jack leapt up and grabbed the device. "Hello, yes, I hear you." The voice on the other end breathed a sigh of relief. "Oh, thank God. I've been trapped here for Lord knows how long. My family too name's Atlas. Now it's not safe to talk here. Head to Neptune's bounty and I'll meet you there, got it?" Jack nodded before remembering Atlas couldn't see him. "Yes, I'll head there right away and we'll get you out." He put down the radio, feeling a rush of hope. Finally, a sane person amidst the madness. Atlas claimed he knew a way to escape. If Jack could just reach him, they'd both get out of this hell. Leaving the barricaded office via a vent, Jack crept along debris-strewn halls toward his new objective. In the distance, the demented howls of the city's inhabitants echoed. Jack kept to the shadows, ducking security cameras and skirting around fallen vending machines. At last, he reached a bathysphere station and descended toward the docks of Neptune's bounty. Fish scattered as the submersible surfaced in a flooded loading bay. Wooden crates and fishing nets lay strewn about, hinting this once bustling port now lay abandoned. Jack's shoes splashed through inches of water as he hunted for Atlas. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the shadows, "Want Adam? I can get it for you." Spinning around, Jack saw one of the ghastly girls from before now kneeling beside a bloated corpse, needle in hand. She vanished again before he could react. Jack shuddered, pressing onward. If Atlas really was here, he had to find him fast. Chapter 5. Jack pushed through seaweed-draped corridors, rusted metal groaning underfoot. Neptune's bounty was a watery grave, floor after floor flooded and strewn with barnacled remains. But according to Atlas, there was a hidden smuggler's base somewhere within this decaying hull where they could regroup. Rounding a corner, Jack collided with a screeching splicer, knife slashing wildly. He wrestled the attacker into the knee-deep water, but the crazed man showed no signs of drowning, thrashing and stabbing even as Jack held him under. Just then, sparks flew as a gunshot rang out, the Splicer's body going limp. Jack looked up to see a normal man lowering a smoking pistol, beckoning him over. "Name's Atlas. Come on now. Let's get you squared away." Atlas led Jack to a makeshift hideout where other survivors huddled. "You'll be safe here, though after what you've seen, I know Rapture must seem like hell." Atlas explained how the undersea city, founded by Andrew Ryan on ideals of unrestrained science and freedom, had collapsed into addiction, mutation, and war. He handed Jack a strange syringe labeled electrobolt plasmids. "They're the key to defending yourself against those splicers. Go on now, try it." Jack injected himself, crying out as lightning coursed through his veins, his body writhing in excruciating pain. When it subsided, sparks flew from his fingertips. "Shock them splicers and security till Ryan's dead," Atlas said. Jack wasn't sure he liked how that sounded, but he knew he'd need these powers to survive. Chapter 6. "Atlas, I made it through the bounty, but there's still no sign of your family," Jack said over the radio. "Keep looking medical pavilion next. I'll meet you there," came the reply. Sighing, Jack continued his search. With his new electrobolt plasmid, he was able to hack security systems and disable flying security bots, blasting his way through waves of splicers. He came upon a surgery theater where a crazed doctor still operated on mutilated victims. Keeping to the shadows, Jack snuck past the graphic horrors. Elsewhere, chilling scrawls on the wall read, "Ryan doesn't own us." This place was hell, just as Atlas said, and Ryan was the devil behind it all. In the critical care unit, Jack discovered a screaming woman strapped to a bed, tortured by a malfunctioning auto doctor violently jamming needles into her. Jack destroyed the robotic arm, ending the poor woman's misery. He then found the body of Dr. Steinman, surrounded by his bloody victims, having gone mad experimenting on people. Rapture's insane citizens confirmed Atlas's warnings, these once brilliant men ruined by their hubris and lack of ethics. Finally, Jack reached the morgue, where weeping and giggling echoed from the cold chamber within. Hand on his pistol, Jack crept inside, trying not to gag at the overpowering stench of death. Small footprints led to a vent as a little sister's voice faded away, singing about angels. Jack didn't know what to make of those strange mutated children, but he prayed Atlas had the answers. Chapter 7. Descending back to the flooded district, Jack was surprised to hear Atlas's voice over the radio again. "Ryan's got me family trapped in Fort Frolic. Get to Hephaestus and cut off his power, then we'll save them." Jack agreed, though disappointed the search continued. Fighting past hordes of splicers, he entered a fishery building looking for the route to Hephaestus. Suddenly, a loud clanging rang out as a gigantic diving suit lumbered into view. Jack dove behind a counter as the Big Daddy unleashed a deadly rivet gun barrage. When it paused to reload, Jack hit it with a shock of electrobolt, but the armored behemoth barely flinched. The sister cried, "Mr. B, watch out," as the Big Daddy resumed its relentless attack. Jack flung everything he could at the monster, a Molotov cocktails, proximity mines, before finally overwhelming it in a hail of bullets. The now silent Big Daddy collapsed, its broken body leaking onto the floor. Jack thought he could see the faint shape of a man behind that metal helmet. "I'm sorry," he whispered, before continuing on. After battling through the desolate seafood market, Jack finally located the tunnel to Hephaestus. He prayed he'd find Atlas and his family soon. He couldn't take much more of this decaying nightmare. Steeling himself, Jack pressed forward into the flaming depths. Chapter 8. Sweating from the sweltering heat, Jack spoke again with Atlas. Hephaestus was a dead end. Where to now? Atlas replied, "Head through Arcadia to reach Julie Langford. She can help get me family back." Jack didn't understand how trees would grow down here, but trusted Atlas knew the way. Exiting the tunnels, Jack stepped out into lush vegetation under glowing lamps. It was a vivid contrast from the cold decay. Spores and blooms release oxygen, explaining the forest's purpose. Jack followed winding trails under the tranquil canopy, almost able to forget the chaos outside. That false peace was soon shattered by more splicers crashing through the underbrush, makeshift weapons in hand. Jack had no choice but to burn, shock, and gun them down before their madness could consume him too. After battling past the flaming debris, Jack reached a research lab. Within, he found an old woman named Langford, sealed in a safe room. Jack promised he'd bring back a research camera with photos of Arcadia to help cure the damage he caused fighting off Splicers. Julie was skeptical, but opened the passage for him. Returning later with the film, Jack saw hope in her eyes that the forest could be restored. "Langford's on your side now," Jack updated Atlas. "Keep pushing," his ally urged. Steeling himself, Jack descended back into blood-stained halls, unable to erase the sights he wished he never saw. Chapter 9. Jack ducked behind a counter as gunfire and profanity filled the air. He'd emerged from Arcadia into a war zone, the farmers' market. Competing doomsday cults waged all-out war for territory and plasmids. Bodies and shell casings littered the floor. Jack had to traverse this no-man's land to reach Fort Frolic. Moving from cover to cover, Jack battled through waves of crazed splicers in grimy butcher aprons and blood-stained dresses. He chain-shocked one group while igniting makeshift bombs to blow away another. No matter how many he put down, more zealots poured in, ranting about divine wrath. An explosion burst through a plaster wall as Jack leapt clear. A makeshift armored vehicle plowed through the rubble, gun turret blazing. Jack pulled out an RPG and fired, the vehicle erupting in a fiery blast. Panting, Jack scanned the settling smoke before making a break for it through the seared-out opening. He didn't stop running till the sounds of battle faded behind closed doors. Over the radio, Atlas said, "Ryan's army is tearing itself apart. Push on to Fort Frolic. We're so close now." Jack slumped against a wall, overcome with exhaustion. He bitterly wondered if close still meant miles of perilous darkness. Steeling himself for whatever lay ahead, Jack pressed on, the market's scars fresh in his mind. Chapter 10. The grand neon lights of Fort Frolic glowed eerily in the gloom. Jack walked past empty theaters, art galleries, and casinos, debauched remnants of Rapture's glory days. Atlas urged haste traveling through this decaying pleasure dome, but caution was required. The district's creator, an eccentric artist named Sandra Cohen, still lurked within. Jack soon found macabre tableaus of plastered corpses, posed in sick parody of Cohen's art. Over the PA system, the madman spoke. "Come now, let's make beautiful art together. Blood is the perfect crimson hue." Jack pushed onward, unnerved by the dingy carnival horrors surrounding him. Reaching Poseidon Plaza, Jack discovered Cohen's warped masterpiece, the corpses crucified on the stage, spotlight fixated in twisted glory. "A brilliant composition," the artist exclaimed over the speakers. Enraged, Jack cut down the bodies, drawing the wrath of Cohen's spliced disciples. A fiery shootout ensued, Jack racing for the exits as the demented orchestra hurled fireballs from above. Cohen's taunting voice echoed as Jack escaped the burning district. "We shall meet again, such inspiring violence." Jack didn't know what unhinged madness drove Cohen, but was thankful to soon leave his deadly theater behind. A Ahead lay Ryan and hopefully Atlas's family. Jack pressed on, the images of Frolic's macabre gallery etched into his mind. Chapter 11. Jack rode a rickety elevator down into claustrophobic tunnels snaking through magma-lit stone. The intense heat grew nearly unbearable as he descended into Hephaestus, or Rapture's, volcanic heart. This geothermal plant powered the broken city above with boiling hydrothermal energy tapped from the Earth's core. Gouts of flame burst from cracked pipes lining the crumbling corridors. Jack's skin glistened with sweat, his jumpsuit singed from stray sparks. He hurried past heavy machinery leaking oil and toxic vapors, the nerve center barely held together through rust and neglect. In the depths, Jack stumbled upon a makeshift prison where Ryan detained Atlas and other dissidents. An audio recording from Atlas crackled over a loudspeaker, condemning Ryan's iron-fisted rule and urging rebellion. Jack now understood Atlas's crusade against the tyrant. Battling through hordes of splicers and big daddies, Jack finally severed Hephaestus from Ryan's control system. Well done. Atlas cheered over the radio. Now head back topside. Ryan's weakened, strike while we can. Jack prayed this would finally be the end. He had aided Atlas's revolution. Now it was time to save his family and slay the devil Ryan once and for all. Chapter 12. Where are you now? Atlas asked as Jack emerged back into ruined city corridors. I made it out of Hephaestus, Jack responded. Excellent. Now head to the apartment complex in Olympus Heights. My wife Moira and son Patrick are holed up there. Atlas said. Jack's heart quickened. After so long, he would finally be reunited with this family he had never met. Jack hurried to the residential district, avoiding splicers and checkpoints along the way. Reaching the vine-covered Olympus Heights tower, Jack took the creaky elevator up to the designated floor. Approaching the apartment door, he hesitated briefly, suddenly anxious to meet the family whose rescue had driven him on this entire nightmare journey. Moira, Patrick? Jack called out as he slowly opened the door. It was pitch black inside. Fumbling for a light switch, Jack blinked as dim bulbs finally flickered on, illuminating an empty living room. Confused, Jack explored the bedrooms and kitchen, all deserted. Atlas, there's no one here, Jack said into the radio. What? No, that can't be, Atlas responded. Check everywhere, under beds, closets. But still no signs of life emerged. Jack's hopes sank. After all this time, all those horrors endured. I'm sorry, he told Atlas. It's empty. A long pause followed. Then, to Jack's surprise, Atlas began to chuckle over the radio. Atlas? Jack asked nervously. The chuckle grew into an outright laugh. My family, you actually believed that nonsense, didn't you? Atlas said between cackles. Jack staggered back, stunned by this sudden revelation. Who the hell are you? He demanded. The voice calmly replied, The name's Frank Fontaine, kid, and you have been one hell of an investment. Chapter 13. Jack reeled in shock. Frank Fontaine, the criminal mastermind, Andrew Ryan's nemesis. He had posed as Atlas, manipulating Jack this entire time. But why? Over the radio, the truth emerged. Fontaine wanted control of Rapture. So he invested in mind control technologies from Dr. Succumb to mold Jack into an obedient assassin, a sleeper agent activated once the plane crashed. Fontaine used the fabricated family story to spur Jack toward his true mission, to kill Andrew Ryan. Jack grappled with this shattering truth. He had no family, no history beyond implanted memories. His free will was an illusion, just a puppet on Fontaine's strings. But through the haze, Jack clung to one thought: he would not be controlled. Journeying to Rapture Central Control, Jack ascended to Ryan's fortified office. Over loudspeakers, the tyrant mocked Jack's every move, proclaiming his defiance of Fontaine's scheme. "A man chooses, a slave obeys," Ryan declared as Jack breached the barricaded door. Seizing control of his actions, Jack told Ryan he was no assassin. He was here to forge his own path. Ryan bitterly laughed, saying the phrase, "Would you kindly?" Immediately, Jack convulsed as mental triggers activated, forcing him forward. "A man chooses, a slave obeys," Ryan repeated as Jack involuntarily raised his club and beat the life from his body. Tears streamed down Jack's face even as he unwillingly fulfilled his programmed command. Suddenly, vengeance burned within him. Fontaine thought he was in control, but Jack would prove once and for all he was the master of his own fate. Chapter 14. Frank Fontaine's smug chuckle echoed over the radio. "Nice work, boyo. Andrew Ryan, Rapture's dictator visionary, pain in my assa, is now just another stiff Rapture's mine for the taking." Jack responded coldly, "I don't know what your plan is, Fontaine, but it ends now. I won't be your puppet." Fontaine just laughed louder. "Still playing the hero, I see. Hate to break it to you, kid, but you ain't nothing but a bundle of mental wires and triggers all tuned to my frequency, but just to be sure." Suddenly, a wave of agony racked Jack's mind. He collapsed, clutching his head in torment. When it finally subsided, Jack rose shakily to his feet. To his horror, his body began moving on its own toward the door. Jack screamed internally, but no words came out. He was Fontaine's prisoner in his own flesh. Jack's body boarded the train back to Fontaine's stronghold, forced along by the mental programming. Smug patter continued over the radio. "Why struggle, kid? Never were nothing but a science experiment, a real live puppet." Arriving at Fontaine Futuristics, Jack was powerless as his body obediently submitted to cruel experiments, forced to kill helpless captives against his will. Days became a numb blur. This must be madness, Jack thought, to be so trapped within yourself. But he would not let Fontaine win. Though it might take years, Jack silently vowed to break these mental chains and end Fontaine for good. Chapter 15. Jack didn't know how much time had passed under Fontaine's control. Days, weeks, each blurred into the next, an endless parade of horrors against his will. But slowly, silently, he fought back. During stakeouts, Jack focused all his energy on moving just one finger, then one hand, defying Fontaine's programming through sheer force. Punishing migraines followed, but Jack pushed through the agony. He hid his tiny acts of rebellion, biding his time. One night, when the coast seemed clear, Jack made his move. Every muscle strained from effort as Jack forced his legs to walk not where Fontaine ordered, but to a bathysphere dock. "Get back here!" Fontaine's voice shouted over the radio as Jack climbed into the pod. But it was too late. Jack slammed the lever down, descending into the depths as Fontaine's curses faded from range. Emerging into Siren Alley, a red light district now infested with Splicers, Jack hoped distance would weaken Fontaine's control. But soon the painful spasms returned, dropping Jack to his knees. "Did you really think you could escape me, you grunt?" Fontaine mocked through the pain. Jack's body once again moved against his will, returning to eternal captivity. But Jack knew that for those few precious moments, he had been free. And the next chance he got, he would not squander the opportunity. Fontaine would pay. Chapter 16. Jack sat slumped in his cell, beaten after countless failed escape attempts. He had challenged Fontaine's mental triggers over and over, but each time failed to break free for good. Jack feared the ruthless criminal's hold on him was permanent. One day, the radio at Jack's hip suddenly crackled to life. Expecting another of Fontaine's jibes, Jack was shocked to instead hear a gentle woman's voice. "Do not fear, child. You may yet be freed. This is Dr. Tenenbaum." Jack listened in surprise as the doctor revealed she helped create Fontaine's mind control technologies. But seeing Jack's struggles, she now sought to undo her unethical work. Over several days, Tenenbaum's therapy broke Jack's mental conditioning using a plasmid she engineered. "Your will is your own again," she declared after their final session. Jack experimentally tried to walk out his door and found no resistance. The puppet strings were cut. But Fontaine quickly realized what happened, sending armies of Splicers to recapture Jack. Tenenbaum urged Jack to claim powerful allies and loopholes in the security systems if he hoped to defeat Fontaine for good. Sneaking through the decaying Utopia once more, Jack knew true hope again. Fontaine could no longer control his mind or body. Jack would assemble his forces, storm Fontaine's stronghold, and end the tyrant's schemes forever. Jack embraced his reclaimed free will. The coming battle would be on his own terms. Chapter 17. Now free of Fontaine's mind control, Jack focused on amassing allies to counter the tyrant's forces. He knew taking down Fontaine alone was suicide. Jack needed all the help he could get. First, he recruited the Little Sisters and their hulking Big Daddy protectors. Tenenbaum had cured many of the girls' mutations, and they were eager to assist Jack. The armored behemoths now loyal to Jack added heavy firepower to his team. Next, Jack visited the anarchist scientist Succumb. Though instrumental in Jack's original programming, Succumb eagerly aided anyone who could dethrone Fontaine. The doctor provided plasmids, ammunition, and security hacks. Fearful Fontaine would eliminate loose ends. Jack also convinced the avowed objectivist Andrew Ryan to contribute resources from beyond the grave. By accessing voice samples, Jack impersonated the late founder, utilizing his cult of personality to gain access to weapons caches. "Do it for Rapture." Jack rallied the citizens over loudspeakers in Ryan's reconstructed voice. Finally, Jack broadcast a citywide call to arms against the tyrant Fontaine, who had deceived and abused them all. Rapture's remaining population joined his makeshift army, craving vengeance. United in purpose, this once divided people readied for war. Fontaine's downfall would be achieved by the very city he sought to rule. Chapter 18. At last the time had come. Jack gazed out over his ragtag army amassed at Fontaine Futuristic's doorstep. It cured Little Sisters, Big Daddies, Splicers, and citizens. He gave a rallying speech calling to fight for their futures. This day, Rapture would be liberated. Blasting open the entrance, Jack's forces flooded into the facility. Security systems and splicers fell before their onslaught. Tenenbaum's coded plasmids helped Jack seize control of defenses, shutting down cameras and turrets. Big Daddies barreled through all obstacles, carving a path straight for Fontaine. Over loudspeakers, the villain taunted Jack's supposed futility. but his mocking words only strengthened their resolve. After battling through countless horrors together, this team would not be swayed from their crusade. Reaching Fontaine's inner sanctum, Jack and the little sisters broke through its heavy doors. At last, the architect of their suffering cowered before them, a shriveled old man, too reliant on plasmids. Jack wordlessly raised his weapon. A look of realization dawned on Fontaine. For all his power, he was mortal. Fear finally broke through the tyrant's arrogance. Without hesitation, Jack opened fire. The little sisters' cheers soon drowned out by thunderous explosions. When the smoke cleared, no trace of Frank Fontaine remained. Andrew Ryan and this city were now avenged. Chapter 19. Though Fontaine was gone, Jack still faced one final choice that would determine Rapture's fate, that of the little sisters. Fully curing their mutations would save the girls. But if Jack instead harvested their atom first, he alone would wield great power. Jack gazed down at the trusting, innocent girls, the victims of Fontaine's cruelty rescued by Tenenbaum's care. Killing them now would make Jack no better than the tyrant he defeated. The doctor placed the cure in Jack's hands. "Save them if you truly believe in redemption," she urged. Looking into their eyes, Jack knew there was only one choice. He embraced each little girl, whispering comfort as he gently administered the cure. Their inhuman growls softened to joyful laughter. Though hardships lay ahead, with Tenenbaum's guidance, these children had a real chance at life. As the former sisters played happily, Jack and Tenenbaum boarded a bathysphere up towards the surface. Rapture's survivors would rebuild in time. But for now, Jack just yearned for open sky. Blinking in the sun's warmth, Jack hoisted a little sister onto his shoulders before turning back for a last look at faded towers sinking below the waves. Rapture's chains were broken. Both city and child were now free. Chapter 20. Blissful days passed basking in the sun and celebrating victory. But lingering doubts tugged at Jack's mind. Fontaine was gone, yet this did not quite feel like the end. Jack sensed some final confrontation still lay ahead. Jack discussed these premonitions with Tenenbaum. Though unsure what form it would take, she agreed Jack should prepare for one last trial. And so they readied whatever defenses Rapture still possessed in its decaying depths. Big Daddies patrolled the city perimeter, wary for any impending attack. Turrets and cameras were fully repaired to provide early warning. Splicers stockpiled ammunition and first aid while fortifying vital locations. Jack injected every gene tonic and powered up every plasmid he could, determined to be ready for any challenge. When no assault materialized after weeks of waiting, restlessness set in. But Jack remained on vigilant guard. Experience in Rapture proved threats often lurked right beneath the surface, biding their time. There would be no celebrating just yet. Not until Jack ended this, on his own terms. That night, lights flickered across ruined buildings. A distant rumble built steadily from the abyssal trench. The wait was over. Rapture's final trial approached. Jack rallied his allies for one last stand. If this was how it would end, they would face it together, united as the family Fontaine never was. Their willpower would determine fate now. Chapter 21. The ocean floor trembled as the hulking structure surfaced in a cloud of silt and debris. Floodlights suddenly illuminated ornate metalwork and towering statuary seemingly cobbled together from Rapture's very walls. Jack realized this was no invading force, but a constructed arena. Fontaine's pre-recorded voice boomed out in mock greeting. Even beyond death, the villain had one last sadistic game prepared. Cautiously entering the arena known as the Proving Grounds, Jack and his allies found themselves subjected to various ruthless traps and trials. Turrets rained bullets from Art Deco moldings, while fiery incineration jets burst forth without warning. Splicers poured from secret hatches, their weapons and plasmids upgraded for lethality. Each room presented a new environmental hazard to be overcome through skill and teamwork. Fontaine had crafted the ultimate death trap as a final joke at their expense. Through repeated attempts, Jack began to recognize patterns in the arena's traps, strategically coordinating his forces. Tenenbaum identified weaknesses in upgraded splicers, allowing Jack to neutralize them more efficiently. Their technical and tactical mastery was tested to the very limit, but finally the last door swung open, revealing the ultimate arena, Fontaine's throne room. Tattered banners and blood-stained finery hinted at the final battle. Fontaine's voice announced only one challenger could proceed. Jack ordered his allies to escape while they could. This was his fight. Weapon raised, he stepped through the archway prepared to end Fontaine's sadistic games forever. Chapter 22. As the door slammed shut behind Jack, the throne room began to transform. Walls extended outward, the ceiling retracted in segments revealing the open sky. Bleachers emerged from the floors while ocean water poured in, flooding up to Jack's knees. He stood at the center of Fontaine's last mad vision, a stadium arena surrounded by endless sea and open sky. Spotlights suddenly blinded Jack as booming loudspeakers introduced the one, the only Frank Fontaine. The tyrant rose from beneath the waters atop a towering, mechanized suit clad in armor, miniguns, and rocket launchers. Fontaine smugly dared Jack to give him his best shot. A fierce battle ensued, Fontaine utilizing all his futuristic powers and weaponry against Jack's plasmids and guns. Whenever Jack seemed to gain ground, Fontaine unleashed a new trick like security bots or hallucinatory gas. "Give up yet, lab rat," he taunted Jack amidst the chaos. But Jack remained focused, systematically targeting each of Fontaine's weaknesses, just as he had learned in the previous fatal gauntlet. Inch by inch, Jack pushed Fontaine back, all his training culminating in this final showdown between student and teacher. With one last shattering rocket shot, Jack destabilized Fontaine's giant mech, sending it toppling backwards into the ocean depths. As Fontaine's screams faded away, the stadium began to collapse. Jack dashed back through disintegrating corridors, twice nearly falling into the abyss himself. But at last he dove into light and rushing water as the facility crumbled behind him. Surfacing beside the patiently waiting bathysphere, Jack clambered aboard and embraced his loved ones, overwhelmed with joyful relief. Rapture had bestowed its final curse, and Jack had endured. Scarred but smiling, this makeshift family rose together toward hope, leaving only ripples above a now silent tomb. The end.